type of number you sold your business for, I didn't even fathom that kind of number. $150 million in cash. So I'll just pause so everybody can absorb that fact. So you close.
Yeah.
The wire comes in. Tell me about that moment. Like,
It's
are
funny.
you and Michal looking at each other and be like, what just happened?
It just felt so weird. We called Michal's parents. This is such a his dad thing to say. He was like, oh my God, so you're unemployed now? When we started making tens of millions, we had 2.5 people.
Tens of millions a year in revenue.
Yeah.
How many?
2.5 people. When we launched the hockey...
Sorry, I apologize. You were doing tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue, and you had
2.5 team members.
I can't fathom what you're saying.
Inhuman effort.
Welcome back to Rise Podcast, Life Stories of Accomplished Individuals. I want to thank you guys for joining us again today. And a couple of things I wanted to ask you. First of all, we just crossed 5,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So thank you. Thank you for your continued attention and thank you for your support. I want to ask you guys a favor. The favor, as usual, is to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel. And if you like what you see, I'm going to ask you to tell your friends about it. Tell your friends, have them join us. And that would really be helpful in the growth of my show. I want to jump in today and go straight into the bio of my guest. And here we go. After a successful career in advertising consisting of 6 years working for a growth strategy consultancy and then 4.5 years working independently, Kate Berski entered the beauty industry, co-founding Curlsmith with her husband, Michal, in 2018. They took their modest $70,000 initial investment and in 4 years sold Curlsmith to the United States giant Helen of Troy for $150 million in cash. So I'll just pause so everybody can absorb that fact. That's not an everyday occurrence, obviously. That's a very life-changing occurrence. Kate is now a sought-after business mentor and angel investor. She is also a passionate content creator and writer, earning a community of over 130,000 followers across Instagram and TikTok combined. Her current project, the nonfiction book 30 Phobia, is a personal and empowering guide for 20-somethings grappling with anxiety over life goals. Drawing from her own experiences as a self-described 30-phobic, she's on a mission to inspire young women to reclaim their 20s and achieve success on their own terms, embodying her belief that life truly begins at 30. Welcome, Kate. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for that intro. That was awesome.
Yeah, well, you and I, so we met, I would say, in March or April of last year.
Yeah.
Okay, and we met at like a very cool and life-changing, for me, a very cool and life-changing event, which was the Intelligent Change Summit.
Yeah. I mean, I think I just listened to your interview with Alex Icon, who we also know.
Yes.
He was kind of like a mutual contact.
Yes,
and you talked about it there. And I think I keep meeting people even since that event that we're there. And it just kind of keeps on growing, doesn't it? So it's a great community that they're building. Yeah,
they've done a really good job with it. I was, I remember going there and first of all, so I met Michal before I met you.
Yeah, that's my husband. Yeah.
Yes. So I met him and then you showed up, I think, the day after.
Yeah.
It was a great event. They did a really good job with it. I want to jump into your story, which is obviously, I don't want to say the peak of it is this $150 million transaction, because there's a lot of interesting things and I really want to talk about the work that you're doing now, but I want to jump into your life story and I want to understand kind of where you started, how you got to where you got. And then I really want to dive into the subject matter that you're working on now.
Yeah,
because, I haven't considered this whole transition from 20s to 30s in a long time since I'm 50. I'm going to be 51 soon. So it hasn't been something that crosses my mind. But as I kind of dove into your work and as I did research about you, I could see why. I could see why, especially in today's society, which is now, internet at scale, high communication. So I can understand why, and specifically why women would have that phobia. But I mean, before we continue, I want to say I believe that men have a whole different set of phobias and fears associated with aging.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm focusing on women because I am a woman and you've got to focus somewhere. But
absolutely.
What's interesting is I'm getting a lot of messages from men being like, don't forget us, we have this problem too. And I saw a study yesterday by a UK relationship charity called Relate, and they found that men feel this turning 30 pressure much more strongly than women. And I feel like it's different pressures. It's more about financial security, maybe kind of status, those kind of things for men. But we'll talk about all that later. But yeah, I definitely haven't forgotten about men. Maybe the next book will be for you guys.
Yeah, we'll jump into your story. But before I do, one thing that I will mention is that just remembering the dating game back, in my kind of earlier life, I can see why. Like I felt that pressure from women. I mean, when I was dating, I was still dating in my 30s, in my late 30s. I met Valeria when I was 38. And I felt that pressure. I felt that women, more so than men, wanted to settle down when they were already kind of approaching their late 20s and when they were already in their early 30s. But let's get to that. We'll get to that. So tell me, where are you from?
I am from the UK originally, from the Midlands, which is a couple of hours north of London.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what were the kind of circumstances around your early life?
I don't have a very exciting founder story, probably. Nothing very glamorous. Just a very kind of regular middle-class upbringing, two parents who are still together now after 50 years, very stable family life. I have two brothers. They were both very hardworking, very strong work ethic in our family. My mum was a primary school teacher. My dad was a psychologist, which probably gave me my initial interest in what motivates people. And whether I used the powers for evil in advertising in that career or whether I used it for good, which is what I'm doing now, which is to help people overcome anxieties. That's been a common thread, that kind of interest in people, understanding what motivates people and how to help them make decisions.
So, again, kind of talking about that, the transaction, your life-changing transaction. It's not like you've come from parents who were able to advise you on business or able to advise you on how to grow and scale a company to get it to 9 figures. Like, that didn't happen.
Absolutely not. There was in need. I mean, you can't really talk about Curlsmith, our business, without talking about me, how my husband, because we founded it together.
Yes.
And we have very, very different backgrounds. But yeah, no one in our families were entrepreneurial in any way. They were kind of like workers, very hard workers, all of them. But when we started the company, they were baffled. Most people in our life were baffled for quite a few years, because for quite a few years, we weren't making a penny either. We were just grafting away.
But you sold this company within 4 years of starting it. So it wasn't that long.
More like 5 years. It felt like a grind, but it isn't slow, steady progress when you have a startup. You can be grinding away and you're flatlining for years, and suddenly there's the hockey stick moment, and suddenly it explodes.
Let's get to that in a second, because I want to dive into that as well. But I want to understand. So what motivated you? So you went into advertising initially. You went into work for someone in advertising.
Yeah. So my goal from about the age of 15 was to work into advertising.
Why?
I was obsessed with adverts. I was obsessed with why people buy stuff. I guess I like the kind of aspirational side of it. I'm a creative person. I love to write and create stuff. So I thought that's a great place for me to be. So I did psychology knowing that I wanted to get into advertising, and that is what I did. And I worked in advertising, market research, brand consulting, marketing agencies, all kind of around the area of advertising.
I apologize. I want to step back a little. Because, and this is, it's funny because this is like a reoccurring theme with all my guests, that they so nonchalantly talk about their life path and how they just chose this. I know, and it was no problem. And it was like easy breezy. But I think that a lot of people, both men and women, at the age of 15, like, you mentioned at the age of 15, you were already obsessed with, with advertising, and then you chose your path and you said, I'm going into psychology, and, you knew what you wanted to do. You were very specific about it. How is that the case? Because for the most part, young people are confused. I mean, even now your content right now is based on young adults being confused, but how are you so certain that this is what you wanted to do? And how did you and this is such a far cry from, because my understanding is, so this city that you grew up in, was this like a big metropolis?
No, not at all. Like a small town.
So you come from a small town. Yeah. Your parents are hardworking. They're
a teacher and a psychologist.
A teacher and a psychologist. Very traditional careers.
Yeah.
Small town. How did you, at the age of 15, and then subsequently after that, say to yourself, okay, I'm going to get into this world of advertising? I mean, you went in, and that first company you worked for, I think they're called Clear.
Well, that was a couple of companies in, actually. I worked initially for a local market research agency, which gave me my love for data and research, which I still love. And then I worked at an advertising agency called Kit Kat Nor, which is part of the Publicis Group. You have a branch here in Miami as well. And then I worked for Clear for about 7 years. So they're more focused on brand strategy, brand growth consulting. And I worked for them. I lived in Sydney, Amsterdam, and London.
Wow. How were you so concise? And like in terms of how were you so decided on this is your career path from a young age? And how did you know to continue pursuing it?
I don't know. I just knew. And the funny thing about my story is it feels like I'm very certain. And I think that's what got me to the project I'm on now, because I had such a wobble in my late 20s. Having had such a... I guess my dad always drummed into me, in psychology, they call it an internal locus of control, the belief that you control your life and you're responsible for your life outcomes, right? Not an external locus of control, which is more of a victim mindset, just going with the flow, just whatever happens to me, these things happen to me, rather than I make these things happen, which I always felt like I make these things happen and I want to do things to my own satisfaction. However, when I hit So I did all that stuff. I had a very strong internal locus of control in my teens and my early 20s. Then I moved to London, started living in a shared house, met a whole bunch of new people. A lot of people were high achievers, and things weren't going quite as planned. So that is the point at which I think in my 20s, having always had that very strong internal sense of motivation, I started being really heavily influenced by other people. So whether it was the people I was working with who were really successful in their careers, the people I was friends with who were suddenly starting to have serious relationships and settle down and get married and buy houses and do all these things that I felt were far off for me. And suddenly my inbox is flooded with invitations to weddings, engagements, baby showers, housewarmings. And I was doing reasonably well in my career, but I wouldn't say I was like high flying. I was working with a lot of incredibly smart people. You came from being like a big fish in a small pond, and you're in a big pond then in London, and you're not anything special, no great shakes. Yeah. So I had a massive wobble in my 20s, and that is also around the time when social media got really big, right? So we were kind of the millennials, my generation of geriatric millennials. We were the first. Sorry,
is it a secret, or is it? Usually, it's impolite to ask a woman her age, but I think in your case, because it's part of the context of what you do now, would it be impolite for me to ask?
Not at all. I think it's a cool question. I'm about to turn 40 in a couple of weeks.
Really?
Yeah. And what's interesting is I'm writing about a time like 10 years ago, at 29, I was having a complete freak out meltdown and quarter life crisis. Now I'm chilling. I feel like I'm exactly where I want to be and I'm on a path. It doesn't mean I've ticked all the boxes. I've got so many more boxes that I've invented now. But yeah, it's such a decade can make such a difference. And that's why I really enjoy working with women in their 20s, because I was flailing in my 20s. At 29, I was
let's get back to that. Yeah. I want to kind of go over the chronology side.
Sure.
I know you're excited to jump into your subject matter, and I am too. But the show is about the life stories of accomplished individuals.
I'm going too fast.
So no, you're not. No, you're good. You're good. You're so enthusiastic about your work, and this is a lesson for everybody else. Guys, be enthusiastic about your work. But I want to talk about. So you worked for the agency. You eventually created your own advertising agency, brand strategy. It sounded really holistic in terms of what you do for brands, or what you did for brands.
Yeah. So I guess I got more and more broad. So I started off in market research. I did that for about a year, and I love data and numbers. I did that about a year, but I wanted to move into London. I wanted to work in a big agency working with big brands.
Yes.
So that's when I went into the advertising agency. I was a brand strategist. They call them brand planners. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I spent 4 years there. I would say a couple of years too long, really. It's really a role that isn't suited to women or men, for that matter, in their early 20s who don't have a lot of experience. I blagged my way into that role, and I probably wasn't experienced enough to fulfill it. So I think that knocked my confidence a little bit, although I got incredible experience. Yeah, so I was there for about 4 years, and then I was...
When did you meet Michał?
Oh, I'm just about to get to that bit, actually. So I'm in my mid-20s now, about 25, and I'm thinking I need to move on. I'm not really progressing here. I don't know if it's the right place for me. It was a very solitary kind of job. There's one brand strategist on an account. So I was working on Lexus and Toyota and Waitrose and John Lewis. But I was the one planner on those accounts. And so I didn't have a team member. I didn't have anyone to like bounce ideas off. I had no partners, no one to create with. And I am a team person. I'm a collaborative person. So it didn't really suit me, that lifestyle. And I'd heard that brand consultancies were much more team-based, much more collaborative, and a much broader skill set. So I wouldn't just be doing the brand strategy. I'd be doing the research. I'd be coming up with new product ideas. I would be developing, brand positionings and market mapping and looking at whole categories. So it felt broader. It felt much more kind of collaborative, and it felt like a good place for me. And I was young, free and single. So a role came up in Amsterdam at an agency called Clear. And I went for it. I got the role. And that's really where my career probably took off. So I was on the right path, but maybe not in the right place. And then I found that space, and it was great. And Amsterdam is an awesome place to live.
And how long did you live there for?
Just about a year. I met Michał. Before I left, I was like, I'm not going to date anyone. I'm just going to like not even look for a guy for, the next year. I'll just have fun. And a week later, I met Michał and I married him eventually. I
want to jump into the story of how you started the company. And I want to get into the company. So take me kind of, how did this happen? So now you're working in separate, you're in London, you're working in two different places.
Yeah, but he's trying to, he's running like a recruitment business on the side, which never really takes off because he has a full-time job. And I'm working insane hours, absolutely insane hours in the agency, leaving the house at, 7 a.m, not being back until 9:30 at night, just maxed out, burning out, loving the nature of my work, but not the way that it worked. And realizing that, there's this weird thing when you work in agencies where the more successful you are, the worse your life gets. And part of my job was pitching for new business, right? So you'd already be at maximum capacity, you'd pitch for a new piece of work and you would win it. And the only thing that would happen is your life would get worse. You'd have even less time and even less energy. And even though, and the pay scale isn't necessarily related to how successful you are, how much money you're making for the company. So I kind of got to the point where I was like burning out, didn't really understand the relationship between how hard I was working and how much money I was making. There seemed to be no relationship. And I was like, I'm just going to go freelance. So I quit. Again, a shock to my family because they were like, why would you give up a 6-figure salary to just not have any guaranteed work? So I quit to go freelance. The intention was never for me to be a part of the business. So he started it.
Did you think he was like a maniac for doing it?
Yeah, at the beginning I did. Yeah. And it puts a huge, you'll know, you've been through it. It puts a huge strain on your relationship. One of you becomes so financially insecure and so time poor.
How long was he doing this on his own until you said, I'm quitting my job and coming in? What stage was the business at?
I had different roles in the business throughout. Like at the beginning, the plan was never for me to be involved, but I was on paper as a co-founder because he was like, I can't just do this I can't just be seen to be on my own doing this. So I need at least one other bum on a seat. So I would go along knowing very little about what was going on to these investor meetings, some of which were great and some of which were disastrous. I was dragged in from the beginning. I never planned to be, but it just dragged more and more and more. And eventually I ended up working full-time for the company, but only a year or two before we sold actually was I officially on the payroll, Other than that, I was just splitting my time, dividing my time between at the beginning, we had to pay our bills, so I had to freelance. I had to continue to freelance. It wasn't an option that I worked on the business because we had a mortgage to pay.
So you had started, or I guess Michał had started with $70,000.
Yeah. So we were lucky to get some really early angel investment.
That wasn't your cash. That
wasn't our money. No, we didn't have any money. We probably had minus money at that point. Yeah, so I think he probably burned through his very limited savings in a couple of months, and then he started trying to get investment. I think my then CEO introduced us to someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone. So 3 or 4 people down the line, we met a guy who gave us 70,000 off the basis of a piece of paper. Basically, we didn't have products at that point. So kudos to that guy. So, and then, the network starts to grow, but we had no network. We didn't even have one. We didn't know any single person who had any money in our friends or family or our network. We didn't know anybody.
So this was like a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And you were able to impress him. You and Michał got into a meeting. You were able to impress him or her. And they wrote you a check.
Yeah. And then they introduce you to other people who write checks. So as soon as you've got the endorsement from one angel investor, and we had only angel investment at the beginning.
But this was solely based on you guys. It was based on your collective resumes, right? It was your two resumes put together. This is your experience, which, I mean, it's very meaningful. Like you're both executives from kind of this world, and you're starting a business within, that's very based on your knowledge.
Yeah, but I don't think that really counted for very much. It was funny, we faced a huge amount of rejection.
Sure.
I think the hardest part of the journey was the first year or so where we were pitching. We didn't have any other option. We couldn't get a bank loan. Couldn't get family loans. We didn't have any of our own money, so we needed investment from outside. And
how many times were you rejected?
Oh, thousands. We are so good at getting rejected. It's almost like a superpower. Like, it honestly doesn't faze me in any way.
I don't think that's the case anymore.
Well, you wouldn't. You'd be surprised. But yeah, so we faced a huge amount of rejection in the beginning, and I think what's hard about it is when you're an entrepreneur and you haven't got a proven track record yet. You've got a startup. You haven't made any money yet. You haven't got the numbers to impress people yet. So they just base it on you. They invest in you as a person. And so when you get rejected, you're being rejected as a person. And people would be so blunt. They'd say, you guys don't look right. You don't
look right? Sorry.
Yeah. You're not like a front, we're not supermodels, whatever.
But why do you have to be?
My point entirely. And now, as an angel investor myself, I look for completely different things. And I feel like the reasons we were rejected were not necessarily always valid. So we didn't look right. We were not charismatic enough, we were told. You've got a funny accent, whatever else, like all these funny reasons.
All of that rejection, what did that do to you? Were you depressed at all? Were you on
Oh, we had ups and downs. Like Michał, one of the best things about him, he's the world's most resilient person. Like, this person gives zero fucks what anyone thinks of him. Yeah. He's taken a lot of knocks. He had a very difficult life before he even met me. And he's just grown this really thick skin. I've had to learn it in the last couple of years because I didn't start off that way. I saw myself as a much more of a sensitive person. But now I realize over the time and with the knocks and ultimately proving those people wrong who rejected us, you become a lot more resilient.
What was it doing? Like, did it have a negative effect on your marriage? Like, all of this rejection and kind of dealing with those difficult times?
The rejection, no, because we felt like we were in it together. I think what had a difficult impact on our marriage is those times when, so I was like in and out. I was trying to make money from my consulting business and I was getting way more work than I could handle. I was trying to make money from that, but also jumping in whenever he needed me to go to meetings, to go and pitch to a retailer, to, go to an investor meeting. I was a brand consultant, so any advice on like brand positioning, whatever it was about that, I was well placed to help him with that.
You helped create the brand, I assume.
Yeah. So I would like quickly, after work, I'd be like, right, we need a new brand positioning. I'm going to write that, or we need to run some research or go and talk to some people. I'm going to do that. So I was fitting it in around my like paid work and wasn't getting paid by Curlsmith. Yeah. So I think the times when I was more in on my freelance stuff, really more of the early days of Curlsmith, that was hard because Michał was just out of the house. He was just gone, 6 a.m. till 10 at night. He worked through the weekends. We just didn't see each other. So it's very hard to like keep a relationship going when you don't physically see each other. And he was so laser focused on the business that I had to take care of everything else, the life stuff. Luckily, we didn't have a child at that point. That added a whole nother bomb into the whole situation. But yeah, I mean, what was interesting is I was always fighting, for many years I was fighting to maintain my own independent business. And in the end, it was so clear that Curlsmith was our future and that's where the focus should be.
Once it started getting scale.
But
sorry, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Why were you fighting to hold on to this?
I don't know. I guess, this whole independent woman thing, I take a pride in being financially independent and I didn't want to depend on anybody else. And I got a lot out of my work. I absolutely loved all the clients I was working with. When I was freelancing, I got to pick and choose who I worked with, great people, incredible brands, the world's biggest brands. Like, it is cool to work on the world's biggest brands and be like, I've created that product for Budweiser and I created the brand positioning for, whatever new beauty brand. Like, it's cool. It's a buzz and it's always changing. I was scared to give up on the business that I'd built and my independence and the financial security, because Curlsmith was ultimately incredibly successful, but it was shaky ground for a few years.
Yeah.
And he would be saying, you need to come and work full time, but I can't really pay you, or I can pay you this amount. And I'm like, someone has to be the stability here. ultimately what I've learned is I should have jumped in full throttle much sooner. And when we were both working in the business full time, our marriage was better.
Oh, wow. So your marriage was better, and I'm assuming that the performance of the company grew as well.
Yeah. When we were both, because otherwise, you know, when you're doing separate things and you're both doing quite stressful things, especially what Mihai was going through, is really a lot of stressful things come at you, unforeseen things when you're running a business, you know, whether it's litigation or, you know, a supply issue, operational things, like things come at you all the time and it's incredibly stressful. And you don't always have the time or energy to come home and run through all the things that have happened and why you might be in quite a bad mood that day. You just come home in a bad mood and your wife's like, what on earth happened? But when I was in the business and I knew what was going on, I knew the context, I was going through it with him, we had so much more empathy for each other. And so now, like, one of my only regrets is not fully giving myself over to the business sooner.
Would you, you know, when speaking with, you know, the young women that you mentor, or just in general in your content, or if you were talking to a friend, would you advocate for going into business with your husband, like with your partner? Or would you, because it sounds like you had a positive, you went from having a negative experience from being in two separate kind of businesses to having a very positive experience, both in your marriage and on the performance of the business. So from your own experience, would you recommend that to most people?
I would, especially if you have complementary skill sets. And we never really overlapped. Like, one thing that was good about me coming in full-time later is I was always a team member. I was never a boss.
Right.
So I was just kind of contributing. And
he was the boss.
He was always very clearly the boss. And that is maybe not a very popular opinion, but that always worked. Like, he is a board leader. He's a board CEO. I'm not. I'm a team member. I'm a team player. I was filling in gaps. We had no HR. I was doing HR. We had no CSR. I was doing CSR. We had no insight. I was doing insight. I was just plugging whatever gaps we had with the skills or not skills that I had. And he was running the show. He was steering the ship. He always had the big vision for the future.
I want to give some context to what you're talking about. When you're talking about from a business structure perspective that you're coming in and filling these gaps, I think I'd like the viewers to know, like, when you say you were filling those gaps, it wasn't that you were hiring like a C-level executive to take care of whatever it was, customer service or whatever it was. You were actually doing it yourself.
No, I was doing it myself.
And the reason I've come to that conclusion is because I read that Curlsmith at the time that you guys sold only had 15 people working.
Yeah.
So you were generating because it's not a secret. I mean, I've seen these numbers. I think you were generating like $36 million at the time that you sold. So you were doing about $3 million a month with 15 people. Is that?
Yeah. And it was only 15 people right at the last minute. You know, like when we started making tens of millions, we had 2.5 people.
Tens of millions a year in revenue.
Yeah.
How many?
2.5 people. When we launched the hockey.
Sorry, I apologize. Sorry. You were doing tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue, and you had
2.5 team members.
Including, not including you and Mihai.
Yes, including us.
Sorry. So it was.
So
sorry,
I know I'm blowing your mind here.
It was the two of you and one part-time person, and you're doing $20 million a year in sales?
I'm the part-time person. So for the first couple of years, it was just Mihai full-time and me part-time. And then we hired a junior team member who was like a jack of all trades. And that was the team that we had when we launched into Ulta Beauty. When we went into, and that was a hockey stick moment for us. We went into Ulta Beauty, in the US. They had 1,200 stores at the time. We went into all doors overnight. We had to somehow scramble and figure that out. And I was part-time. I just had a baby, and we had the junior team member, and we had Mihai, and that was it.
Sorry, I can't wrap my head around what you're saying. How is it possible to run a business doing about $1.8 million in revenue, and it's not like it's this isn't a digital product. This is a physical product that requires production, iteration, logistics, reverse logistics. It requires all of this. How does this even? I can't fathom what you're saying. Inhuman
effort. Inhuman levels of time and effort. Why is the question? We were obsessed with bootstrapping. Right? We read The Lean Startup, and we were obsessed with bootstrapping to the point of ridiculousness. And now looking back, I think, Mihai would probably say the same. We should have hired more people much more quickly. And next time we would, because we don't want to kill ourselves again. We don't want to burn out that many times again. But I think at the beginning, the point of a startup is you've got to survive. And I think we would not have survived if we hadn't been so tight with cash. Like we meet entrepreneurs, they're like, oh, we've got a seed funding of 5 million to launch our product range. I'm like, we did it in 70,000. It can be done. You can go into every single Ulta door overnight in 70,000 pounds because we did it. And I think that was a secret to our survival. We just kept that like scarcity mindset going a little bit too long. I think, especially, you know, we should have been more realistic when I was going to have a baby. I was going to have to step out for a bit. We needed a team.
By the way, I'm not judging because I'm shocked. Don't mistake it for me judging you, because there's nothing to judge, because at the end of the day, you sold the company for like an astonishing amount of money. So whatever you did was correct at the end of the day, regardless of anyone's opinion, whether the way you were doing it was right or wrong. Nobody's opinion matters, because you were doing it right because it ended up with the correct result.
Yeah. I mean, right from the outcome point of view, not right from a life point of view. I think, you know, there was no balance.
Yes. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. So if I may kind of give you my opinion on your life and your situation, if you don't mind, but you know, this happened when you were in your early 30s.
Yeah.
All of this. No, mid 30s too.
Yeah. So how old were we when we started it? So we got married when we were 32. I think we started it like the year after that. Yeah.
My point is that you were at an age where that's your time to do that. That is your time to do that, right?
Yeah.
So just drawing like a parallel with me, I feel like I have very few regrets, but one thing I do regret, kind of listening to your story, one thing I do regret is that I didn't work hard enough between the age of 30 and 40, meaning I had established a business in my early 30s and I was doing well with it and it was good and everything was fine. And I didn't have this like burning desire like you guys did to shoot for the moon, because I didn't know the type of number you sold your business for. To me, that might as well have been a gajillion $billion. Like that, I didn't even fathom that kind of number. This was back. I'm 10 years older than you, so this was back at a time where you didn't hear on social media how people are selling their companies for hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars and all this. So I had no knowledge of this. It's like I had a dream, and my dream was to make $80,000 a year when I was in my like mid 20s, and now I was making way more than that. Every year, and I was like, life is good. But my point is you know, getting back to my opinion on what was going on with you guys. Yes, it was hard, but you did the right thing, because those are your years to do what you did. Maybe not as extreme as you guys did it, because I can't imagine running at the time a $20 million a year company with 2 people with physical product. You just blew my mind. But it was good. I mean, it ended up well. Like,
yeah, it did. I mean, we would do some things differently. Most of them to just make life a little bit more bearable. And now we have a family, it's a different ballgame. We didn't have kids when we started Curlsmith, so we could just work every hour, every day. There was no consequence to it. Right.
Tell me about the sale. Tell me about how this all happened. Like, did you get a phone call from Helen of Troy saying, hey guys, we want to throw like 9 digits at you?
Absolutely not. No, it's a whole process. I think, you know, we kind of felt, particularly Michal felt that he'd taken it as far as he wanted to. I think we both, even though it's difficult at the beginning, I think we both thrive on that, creating a new business, creating a brand, when everything's new and you're quite scrappy and you're kind of doing it all. And as we both hate corporate kind of culture.
Yeah.
And the bigger you get, the more team, and we never got to a huge team, but even so, we did get to the point where we started to have HR policies and this and that, and all of that just sucks the joy out of the creative entrepreneurial experience for both of us. So as soon as it got to that point where we had to start being like a serious corporate business and hiring people who were quite serious in corporate as well. And we had an amazing team, but you know, they require certain things and certain, you know,
I'm aware.
Setups. So as soon as that started happening, we probably started thinking maybe it was time to move on to the next thing.
Well, you knew that it was at any point when you have a business that's doing whatever, $25, $30 million a year, you understand you have something, you understand what the multiples are. I mean, you guys are both at this point, you're not only seasoned, operators, but coming from your background, you knew what these transactions were going for, like with multiples and stuff. So when you were, to the point where you're doing $20, $30 million a year in sales, did you at some point say like, hey, we have a business worth over $100 million? Did you look at each other and say, hey, like we made it, like we're good. This is going to sell at some point. Oh,
it's funny. Like, I don't think either of us ever thought we've made it or we're going to make it. Like, we just always were waiting for for someone to pull the plug. I think
to pull the plug?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
You always feel like
it was going to go to zero?
We got tired of that fear. that it could all disappear at any moment. And we just thought it's time to get out.
So you went looking for a buyer, or the buyers came?
Yeah, we went looking for a buyer. So we initially we thought we could do it all on our own. Then we quickly realized that you do need to engage a broker.
You hired a bank,
and they go and look for which companies might be in the market for that type of category, type of brand, or whatever. So you end up with like a big list of suitors. You whittle them down, or they whittle themselves down. And it's a whole process. It's an additional job. I think the whole process took almost a year. From like first engagement to ultimate exit. And it's a huge amount of work because we started and we grew really quickly. So you don't naturally have all your ducks in a row. You don't have all that paperwork and everything signed and this policy and that policy. And so we had to kind of go back and retrospectively make sure the business was in great order, in a saleable shape.
So between the time where you got the initial term sheet, so I mean, you did you get multiple? I mean, I don't know if we can go down this road. If we can't, just tell me and we'll move on. But did you get multiple term sheets?
I can't remember. I think we ended up with a couple of offers, but it isn't just about the number that you're being offered. It's about the terms.
Sure.
And we wanted to exit. And there was only one buyer on the table who offered us an immediate exit.
And that's who you sold to.
And that's who we sold to. So it wasn't actually the highest number.
And so how stressful was that time between their term sheet, diligence, and close?
So stressful, especially because they constantly try to renegotiate. So market conditions change, other brands, your sales that month, like they're interrogating it to the nth degree. And so you never feel like it's a done deal. You never celebrate. It's a joke. We didn't even really celebrate afterwards because we both got really sick. I think probably after all the stress and stuff.
I want to talk about the closing. Like just briefly, I want to talk. So you close.
Yeah.
The wire comes in. Tell me about that moment. Like, are
funny.
you and Michal looking at each other and be like, what just happened?
There's this thing. Have you heard of the arrival fallacy?
No.
So it's a term in psychology. The arrival fallacy is the belief that we kind of all have that as soon as we achieve a certain thing, we'll be happy, right? Life will be complete. As soon as I get thin, as soon as I get £1 million, whatever it is, as soon as this happens, that's it, that's done. That is the end goal. And I think, we probably thought...
Sorry, what's it called again?
The arrival fallacy.
The arrival fallacy,
yeah,
okay.
And the reality is those moments can be quite anticlimactic.
Yes.
And that's exactly how it was for us.
Stop.
Yeah. So it was so weird because it wasn't even like we were in a room with any human beings. We sold to an American company through a broker. It was all kind of impersonal in a way. And we just got on this call. There was like 25 people on this call. No one was speaking. And it was a very formal voice telling us the deal has closed. That is it. Boom. We're like, okay. Did that just happen? It's like 10 o'clock at night in the UK where we were. And we were like, okay. And then our broker called us and that was a little bit more woo. But it was still like, it was 10 o'clock at night. I knew my daughter was going to wake up at 5 a.m. She's a terrible sleeper. I was like, oh God, it's not like we're going to like go out and party now. So we were like, oh my God. So it just felt so weird. We called Michal's parents. This is such a his dad thing to say. He was like, oh my God, so you're unemployed now.
So you just had your portion of that $150 million, whatever that was. You had that wire to you. The wire hits. Michal calls his dad and he said, oh, so now you don't have a job?
Yeah. That was his main concern, that we would be like unemployed.
How about your family? How did they react to all this?
They just can't believe it. My mum still tells me like every week, she's like, I can't believe that even happened, because I think it all just felt like such doom and gloom for what felt like a really long time. It felt like this could fall apart at any time. He's just working away. We're just working away. Like nothing's happening. And we always had this, we never rested on our laurels. We never were like, one thing we never did, and one thing I wish we did, is celebrate along the way. So we would like win an award. We'd reach a certain threshold in terms of how much we were making.
Yeah.
And it was just, okay, fine, but don't rest on your laurels, carry on to the next. And we never celebrated. And we're not good at celebrating.
We're the same way. We're the same way.
It's just the next thing, isn't it? And, I sort of wish, and I think because we weren't ever those entrepreneurs that were we were so behind the scenes, it was a joke. We were never those entrepreneurs that were online celebrating all the wins and posting a picture of being here, there, and everywhere. Everybody thought we were failing. And then suddenly they were like, you what? I thought things weren't going that well from what you'd been saying. Maybe we were telling the horror stories a little bit too much, but yeah. And then suddenly we'd exited and there was this money that we never expected.
Has your life changed?
No, what's funny is we still live, and we're in Miami now, so that's a different thing to be doing for a couple of months. But yeah, for the first year, I think we were in shock. I think when we first met in Ibiza, we were completely shell shocked. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. We went from like being so incredibly overwhelmed, busy, to like, whew, your whole life purpose has gone overnight. That's a really weird feeling. And we hadn't yet figured out what we were going to do next. So that's odd as well. And yeah, we were just nervous. You know, it was a weird time. So it definitely didn't feel like, woohoo, we made it. And anyway, money isn't the end goal. It's just it's a passport to the next thing.
What's it? I mean, it's freedom, it's security.
Yeah, freedom. And now that's why, you know, I feel really fulfilled with what I'm doing, because that financial security has enabled me to be like, to think what I actually want to be doing. What do I really want to spend my time doing? Not what I have to.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So what inspired you to do this? What inspired you? First of all, I mean, you've become a content creator. Like you are a content creator. Yeah. As I mentioned,
that's a surprise to me, that part.
Really? Well, why is it? I mean, it sounds like you were intentional about doing it. So why are you surprised that it's happening? It's
a good question. So I guess the whole writing thing, I'm probably doing now what my family expected me to always be doing in terms of like the writing and the creative side. I was the kid who spent my free time writing stories. So I love to write. I'm obsessed with writing. I always would have like a little bit of a blog going on or whatever, but never really devoted my full time to it. And working in advertising, you know, writing copy for Curlsmith, any writing that needed doing, I was doing the writing, you know. So I've always loved to write. So it's probably no surprise that I'm doing that. I always wanted to write a book. I was like, now is my time. Now I don't need to worry.
Sorry, the book's not published yet.
No,
You're working on it.
It's in progress.
Yes.
So yeah, I always wanted to write a book. So I knew that if I ever had the opportunity of the financial security to not earn money for a year or whatever, that is what I would do. I knew it was going to be a book. I didn't know what it was going to be. Thought it would be fiction for a while. Then settled on nonfiction, was going to write a book about the trials and tribulations of being in your 30s, much more focusing on having a family, running a business, all those kind of conflicts. But spoke to an editor that I know, a literary editor, and he was like, actually, this bit that you've written about your turning 30 crisis, your quarter life crisis, the kind of pivot point in your life, that's really interesting. So why don't you go and like explore that and come back to me when you figured it out. So it ended up, I had several like big dramatic pivot points in my life that I could have written about or based the story. Several. So it could have been about becoming a mother. That's a huge life change. It could have been about starting the business, huge life change, or selling the business, whatever. But I felt like where could I kind of connect with most people? I wanted to go back to this quarter life crisis because I genuinely feel like there's all this pressure in society, and the kind of Forbes 30 under 30 and all those lists don't help. There's this weird pressure that we have in this society that you need to get your act together by the time you're 30. You need to have all your ducks in a row, your job, your relationship, home ownership, financial security, whatever it is, all these things. And people internalize that pressure. And we have this like timeline that we seem to unquestionably follow throughout our lives. So I need to meet the person, I need to get married, I need to buy the house, blah, 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 blah. And you're going along trying to tick all these boxes and not really questioning it. And that's what happened to me, that I was going along assuming all these things, expecting all these things would happen for me. And I reached 29 and not a single thing had happened that I had on my list of life goals.
You hadn't been married yet?
I wasn't married. I didn't own a house. I didn't own a car. I wasn't where I wanted to be in my career. Nothing. And I'd always been an overachiever. So it kind of came as a real shock to me when that happened. And I felt like I was falling behind. And I had this growing sense of like, almost panic, this rising panic of like, I'm running out of time. And I hear this from so many people that I talk to now, so many women in their teens and 20s. I feel like I'm running out of time. I'm falling behind. And the reality is you turn 30 and nothing changes. You're the same person. The world does not end. The bomb does not explode. It's a false deadline that has been imposed on us that doesn't mean anything.
Where does it come from? Where does this deadline come from? What is it about society that is saying that, hey, you have to have all this. As a woman, you need to have all of this figured out.
Yeah, I mean, like we started off saying, men have the same pressure, but
men. Sorry, if I may, men's pressure comes later. And look, the real truth is if we're getting real, like if you want my perspective as a man, just the timelines are different, and men have more time because at the age of, and this may be politically incorrect, but it is the truth, men in their, let's say, late 30s or even early 40s, there is a ceiling, because I think when men wait too long and they started getting into their like kind of mid 40s, late 40s, 50s, like it's hard. If you haven't kind of settled down and established your career, your partner, children, whatever it may be, there's a cap. But I think that ceiling not the ceiling, that deadline is far earlier for women.
I believe the only thing that has a genuine deadline is having babies, right? Having a family for women. And even then, you don't know your own personal timeline. Women can have babies into their 40s now. So you feel there is a limit, but you don't know where it is. For anything else, I feel like there is no deadline. The deadline does not exist. It is a fallacy.
How about finding a partner?
Why would there be a deadline? You can find love at any age.
I can tell you why. So again, I don't get political. It's not even a political thing, but I don't get controversial. But there is a certain, I think, reality, right? And I'm treading carefully.
Yeah.
Because you're waiting for it.
Are you talking about the quality of the dating pool declining?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how I'm trying to politely talk about this. Is that's the case where the people who you have the chance of dating kind of go away. So like for a guy, that pool is like he has more opportunity over time. Whereas a woman, it declines. So, and again, I don't want to...
Until everybody gets divorced and there's a fresh pool.
Sure,
again.
Until everyone gets divorced. But let's say, for example, a woman who's in her 30s, she has the opportunity to date men that are, 35, 40, early 40s, mid 40s, right? But a woman in her 40s, what's the pool of men that she's dating at that point? I guess that's what I'm trying to say without being...
Yeah. I mean, the audience that I focus on is women in their 20s.
Right.
And I have women as young as 18, 19 messaging me, panicking that they've not met their life partner yet. And I'm thinking...
18, 19 is really young.
30 is not the deadline. There may be some kind of limits later down the line, but 30 is definitely not the deadline for any of these life goals.
But would you agree to say that the deadline or like that deadline for men and women, men have a lot more leeway. Like they've got an additional 10 years that they can take to figure all this out. Or do you think that's not the case?
I think biologically there might be some truth to that, but not in any other sense.
Okay.
I genuinely believe that you can start a business at any age. In fact, there's this whole myth of the young entrepreneur, right? That they're in their 20s, this Silicon Valley guy. And in reality, the most successful businesses are started by people in their 40s.
Right.
So, some of the most successful women in the world, they took off much later in life. Oprah didn't reach fame until her 40s. No, of course.
I guess I was specifically talking about dating.
Yeah. Dating, yeah. But I mean, I guess my focus is on women in their 20s, and my message is focus on meeting your person, not your timeline. Because if you are so dead focused that you need to meet your person or get married by the time you turn 30...
You'll meet the wrong person.
You'll rush things, you will marry at haste and repent at leisure. Far better.
Sorry, can you repeat that? You will marry at haste and repent in leisure.
Yeah, marry in haste, repent at leisure. You've got your whole life to regret marrying that person, right?
Right.
Far better to take your time to meet the right person.
I think that's the case with men too. I think that people who rush into marriage because they feel that there's some kind of a deadline rather than meeting the right person. I'll give you a little anecdote from my own life. I got married later on. I mean, I don't know if I got married when I was 39. I don't know if that's later on. It doesn't feel like it is anymore. But
I think average is like 30, 31 now.
Yeah, so 39 is quite a bit more. And I remember when I entered my 30s and I was in my mid 30s, my mother never gave me a hard time. She never gave me a hard time because she always said to me, she goes, I would rather you wait and meet the correct person than marry the wrong person and get divorced. And she said, the only difference is going to be that your children will be younger than your friends' children.
Yeah.
But wait for the right person. And that's actually what ended up happening. I waited and I didn't settle for, whoever it was at the time. So, when we talk about the deadline for women who are in their 20s, is there a lot of anxiety from women in their 20s around, and I know I'm specifically talking about dating, but is there a lot of anxiety about meeting that correct person by a certain time? Because maybe they feel, and I guess this is what I was trying to say before, not eloquently, is that maybe by the time they get to their 30s, is there like a real decline in the amount of men that would potentially be partners for them?
Yeah, I think there is a sense that there's a decline in the quality of the dating pool as you get older and options are taken away. But a lot of women, they do this backwards maths thing, which is really awful, where they'll be like, okay, they'll start with the end goal, like I want to have kids when I'm 35. So that means I need to Be with the person, you need to be married for a couple of years. So, okay, I need to be married at 32. And I need to meet that person, I need to be with them a few years before I get married. So I need to meet that person by the time I'm 30. Shit, I'm falling behind. So they have this timeline in their head, this invisible mental timeline, and they'll be living for the future, which is the essence of anxiety, living in the future. And then they just spiral.
But I guess what I'm challenging is, why do you feel that deadline's not real? At least the biological one. I agree that the career one is, you can start a business later, you can get your dream job later, but there are simple biological truths from both men and women about when it comes to having children. So why do you feel that that's not a real deadline?
But not everybody should or will have children, right? That's
True,
not everybody's
that's
priority and their life choice. And I'm not saying that these things are bad. It's just, and it's also a little bit about prioritizing. So I had a major meltdown. I thought that my life was going to follow a very traditional timeline. I thought I'd have a career. I thought I would have marriage, kids, white picket fence, all that stuff. I don't know why I thought that, but I did.
By what age did you think you'd have it?
Well, my main one was I wanted to be married by the time I was 30.
Okay.
And so Miho and I were together when I was 29, and I had a complete meltdown. I was like, oh my God, we're nowhere near that. You're not committing to me. So I upped and moved to Australia. At that point.
Sorry, without him.
Yeah, on my own. We were still together, but I was frustrated in my job. I wanted to change. And also I was like, oh, well, there's nothing for me here. We're not getting married, which is what I really wanted at that time.
But if he would have proposed, would you have done that?
Probably not. So it was the best thing he could have done to basically be like, no, basically turn down my marriage ultimatum at 29.
You gave him a marriage ultimatum.
I kind of gave him a marriage ultimatum, which is a very uncool girl moment. And he basically turned me down. I raced off to Australia and did a bit of soul searching and kind of started thinking about, why did I have these expectations about, and why did I have this deadline? Why did I need to be married by 30? Why did I need, actually, where did all that come from? And that was the turning point for me, where I started being like, I've been way too influenced by what all my friends are doing and their life paths and what I'm seeing on social media with all these engagement photos and people getting married and having babies and whatever. What do I actually want and need? And I realized when I started looking in instead of looking out, that what I wanted was quite different from some of the other people that I was surrounding myself with. What I really wanted was a huge amount of freedom. I wanted to travel the world, live in different countries. I wanted to start a business and I wanted to find a life partner, but it didn't mean I needed to get married right now. And actually, if I'd have got married and settled down and started a family at 29, none of this would have happened.
You're talking about Curlsmith and
any of my career. I never, if the clock stopped at 30 and I had settled down at that point, and Miha would have said, yeah, let's do it all, the whole thing now, I never would have started a business, scaled and sold that business. I never would have, discovered the joys of living in different countries, met so many great people. I never would have become a mother. I wouldn't have become a multiple homeowner. I wouldn't have ultimately found what I feel is my true purpose and a really aligned path at the age of nearly 40. If we would have got married at 29, none of that would have happened. And I firmly believe that. So
see, I think that what you're saying right there, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for the people who are subscribed to you and from the people who are listening to you. And I think it's the biggest takeaway for young women who are in that age group. And I think you're nodding because I think we're on the same page on this, but women who are in their late 20s, they should see you as this as this kind of beacon, because your life turned out exactly the way it should have. But you had work. I'm assuming you had some work to do, because you had this anxiety and you gave me this ultimatum and you shipped yourself up to Australia. So, you described that as an uncool girl moment, which I agree with you. Men don't typically like ultimatums, but what got you over this 30 deadline, this deadline of 30, and then got you thinking, what cleared your head and said, okay, I gotta, I'm okay. And then ultimately got you to this amazing place. It was
a physical shift in terms of I physically upped and moved myself to a different place. And I found a life in Sydney, Australia, where I was really happy. The weather was awesome. I really enjoyed my work, but I didn't have to work too hard. I was going to the beach on the weekends. I'd met a great group of expats. I thought, I can make a new life here. I can start a whole new life that really fits me at 30. Whether or not we ever get married, we did in the end. But
did he follow you to Australia?
No, he didn't. We tried, but he wanted to start the business, and he thought that quite rightly that being back in Europe was a better place to do it. And I just had a freak out about being so far away from family. I mean, it's a 24-hour flight. It's not a small deal. So yeah, I was only there for about 3 months, but in those 3 months, I cleared my head completely. I let go of so much stuff. I let go of the weight of other people's expectations. Yes. In an expat community, as you'll know, people are doing different things. People aren't following the conventional timelines. Mm-hmm. And I think having a break from the marriage and babies and all that stuff really helped me see that it wasn't the life I wanted. It was quite some years later that we started a family. So yeah, I think most of it was just letting go of the external stuff, not seeking external validation, not being worried anymore about whether my mum was asking me when I was getting married.
Was she asking you?
Yeah. And I think as a woman, particularly as a woman in your 20s, every event you go to, whether it's like a party or a baby shower or a wedding, people are questioning your life choices. And it comes under the guise of polite conversation. They'll be like, when are you getting married? When are you going to propose? What about babies? What about another baby? When are you going to buy a house? You really should be getting on the property ladder. You really should be, saving X amount of money. When are you going to get that promotion?
What were their, I mean, they sound like jerks, to be honest with you, but they're not. I know that they're not.
It doesn't come in a barrage like that, but it's well-meaning interest, isn't it?
No, but it does come in a barrage like that, because I even remember the fact that, I mentioned my mom never gave me any kind of grief, and she said, just meet the right person. I'm less concerned about your timeline than I am about the quality of your relationship. It was never about that, but I would have strangers be like, hey, so why is, Carrie, like, why aren't you married yet? Or why haven't you settled down? Or why, so that would happen a lot. And I feel that those people weren't ill-intentioned.
Yeah.
A lot of them were just gossipy and just nosy and talking shit. But I don't know, like, it's this really weird expectation that people have on you. So what would be your response to these people saying, hey, Kate, when are you going to get this together or that together?
Well, my initial response was to panic, to be like,
really? To
feel pressure. So I think questions create pressure. When someone questions your life choices, A, that makes you feel like that is something you should be doing.
Yeah.
And B, it creates pressure why you haven't done that yet.
But why are you giving them authority? Like, why would you give them that power to think that they know what's better for you than you? Why? Because they may have been married, or they may have had something.
Yeah, because people look at you through their own worldview. It's the same with starting a business. They'd be like, why would you give up $100,000 a year to make nothing on a dream and a hope? So that's the turning point for me, when I stopped giving the Fs. Basically, when I realized the mindset shift of, I actually do things for my own satisfaction, and what is really important to me now, and what does my life actually look like, when I'm looking forward. It's actually not. The only reason I felt like I should be doing those things is because I'd been kind of fed it through my whole life, and I'd internalized it to the point of thinking I wanted it. And only when I stepped away, I was like, actually, that life, that conventional life path isn't for me. That isn't going to make me happy.
What do you think social media is doing to young women right now? In this context?
It is, first of all, showcasing unrealistic ideals of the way people look, how much money they've got, the way they live. You're either looking at the very wealthy and beautiful and successful 1%, or those people are lying. It's not reality. Mm-hmm. And I have this theory called the expectation gap. And I think social media has inflated people's expectations of their lives to the extent that real life can never match up. Even, we talked about dating earlier, if you see these incredibly romantic dinners and proposals and perfect looking spouses online, and you come home to someone who isn't perfect, it makes you unsatisfied. I think the expectation gap is the source of all unhappiness. When you expect something and the reality doesn't live up, all of that negative space is, depression, despondency, anxiety, all those kind of negative feelings. It's just the difference between your expectations and the reality. And reality is, life isn't always fun and beautiful and easy, and people aren't always happy and nice and healthy. And
on social media, people are seeing the brochure, right? They're seeing they're seeing the marketing material, right? They're not seeing everything else behind it. They're not seeing, quite frankly, they're not seeing the divorce. They may see the picture perfect lifestyle of a married couple, and then that couple, behind the scenes, there could be all kinds of things going on. So people don't see that. But this unrealistic expectation of women, it's obviously fueled by social media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's a problem for both genders, definitely. But I feel there's just so much pressure on women to look a certain way, to act a certain way, to your point, to be married by a certain time. What is the solution? So your solution was hightailing it off to Australia.
Yeah.
Okay. But let's be realistic. I mean, you're an exceptional person, and what you did was, I mean, it worked for you, but that may not work for everyone. So kind of in your call it counseling, in the way that you talk to young women to get them out of this phobia, to get them out of this fear, to get them out of this negative cycle, what advice, like what is your, I guess I'm asking you to tell me like what's going to be in your book, like how are you counseling young women?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is letting go of external expectations and external validation and figuring out and really looking in.
Yes.
And figuring out what it is that you genuinely want and need, forgetting the noise of what everyone else expects, wants, or is doing, or is going to think of what you're doing. What is genuinely going to fulfill you, and what is your priority? So hard. And I think, but there's some simple things you can do. So one thing I like to do is the should test. So usually, typically, women will have one thing above all others that's they're really freaking out about, their career or not meeting their person or whatever it is. And so you just sit down with them and talk to them about, what are you afraid of? What are your fears? What about this? Tell me all about it. And just notice the language that they're using, or do it on your own and notice the language that you're using. If at any point you find yourself saying should, and Brene Brown will say, stop shoulding all over yourself. Shoulds are not genuine needs. They're not genuine things that you need to be happy, fulfilled, and sane. They are external expectations. You need to let them go. Anything that's a should that you cannot reframe as a need or a want that's going to genuinely fulfill you is not from you. It's from outside. It's from someone else. It's from society. It's from your parents, your family, whatever. So for me, getting married by 30 was a should. It wasn't a need. And actually, one thing you can also do is play out the scenarios. So I like to do kind of worst case scenario, best case scenario. So for me, turning 30 without a ring on my finger, worst case scenario, there is none. Like the clock isn't actually going to stop. If I get married at 30 in one day, how is that different? It's a false deadline. It's a fake. There are real deadlines in life, but that one isn't real, needing to have a ring on your finger by 30. So I played that forward in my head. I was like, nothing's going to change if I'm not married by 30. Best case scenario, again, I did that on myself. Best case scenario, I do get married at 29. And actually that would have ended up being a bad thing.
Right. We established that,
it would have, I nearly said a bad phrase. It would have got in the way of my genuine hopes and dreams and plans. And
the success that you accomplished. But I want to play devil's advocate on it.
Sure.
There are people in general, not just women, who they miss the proverbial bus or train. The boat. They missed the proverbial boat. That's the phrase. That's the expression. So they missed the boat. And I know some of these people, women who are now in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, men who are in their 40s and 50s who, for whatever reason, due to their life circumstances, due to stubbornness, due to thinking that there's going to be someone better who's going to come along, where now they're struggling later in life, in midlife, without finding that partner. So is it possible that some of that pressure and regardless of whether the pressure comes from, whether it comes from society or whether it comes from your friends or whether it comes from just social media, whatever, is there part of this pressure to kind of get on with things? Is there any of it that's positive that will not stop, but I'm assuming the people who are in their 40s and 50s who didn't find that partner, as an example, let's assume they're unhappy. So is there any positive from the pressure that society puts on us to move forward? Is there anything positive about that push?
I mean, I guess it depends in which area you're looking. I think what it does is help you identify your priorities. So in the case of those people that have ended up later in life and they're single and they're not happy about it, that would tell me that should have been something that they prioritized earlier. So if you sit down and really think about the thing that's really keeping you awake at night, what are the consequences of that not happening for me? What are the consequences of that happening for me? And if it gets to the top of your pile as like, that is the main thing. I've had conversations with women in my life recently who maybe are getting a little bit older and are panicking about not having children, but typically they're not with the right partner or they're not with a partner. And if that thing is so important to you, and they'll say to me, I cannot imagine a life where I don't have children. I'd give up anything else as long as I get to have a child. in that scenario, if that thing comes to the top of your list and that is going to be a deal breaker, if it doesn't happen, that is your priority and that is what you should focus on. So if figuring out your priorities earlier on is really key. For me, having children wasn't a priority.
Right.
So if it wouldn't have happened, and I had children later, if it wouldn't have happened for me, I knew I would have been okay with that. I would have still had a full, fulfilled life, because it was an amazing gift that we have a child, but it wasn't our focus. And if it didn't happen, we'd still have a great life. But if for some of my friends, that is the most important thing, and I say, well, just do it anyway, you have to find a way. If that is the thing that you're going to always regret not doing, there is always ways.
So I think what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is that the motivation, I don't want to call it pressure, but the motivation to hit certain milestones, whether it's a partner, a child, a business, whatever it may be, that motivation shouldn't necessarily come from comparison.
It should come from inside, not outside.
Exactly. And I think that's when I'm challenging you on the premise that we should completely ignore everything around us and just do things at our own pace, and then we'd be potentially unhappy if we didn't do those things, and the window of opportunity closed. What I understand that you're saying is that we should be looking at it from the perspective of we should be the ones, that motivation should come from internally for things that we actually want, rather than comparing ourselves to, social media, which is just not true.
Yeah. Do the things you need to do, not the things you should do. And I'm not an advocate for kind of sitting around and waiting for life to happen. I'm actually an advocate for proactively making life happen. But you need to do a little bit of work to figure out what your genuine priorities, your deal breakers, your deal makers, and that needs to come from inside. And then you can really be clear on what you need to focus on, because you can do everything, but you can't do everything all at the same time. So you need to focus. So we, in our lives, had a very strong work focus for 5-6 years.
Yes.
We couldn't possibly have invested really in our relationship, had a family, traveled and had fun times, and invest in other areas, because we were completely laser focused on that one thing. And that's okay, because that was our priority at the time. And I don't think it's necessarily always possible to have work-life balance in a continuous everyday sense, but in the sense of 5 years of intense work, giving it everything, which buys you 5 years of living in a really nice way, that's balance to me.
Were you hearing people say to you, you're not wasting your life, but you're putting so much into this business where, you're not focused on having a child or doing this or doing that? Did you have those voices around you telling you, what are you doing? Why are you killing yourself?
Yeah, especially when we weren't making any money. It's what are you doing all this for?
Yeah.
And a lot of the reality is most startups fail. So we had that in our head. We know the stats.
But how did you, I apologize, sorry. How did you reconcile the fact that you're in a business, you're spending all of your time, you guys are super stressed, you're trying to, get to your goal with that business. Yeah. You're not having a child at the time. You didn't have the child. And you have all of these people around you saying, hey, you should be doing this. And you're in a business that you don't know if it's going to succeed or not. How are you able to successfully tune those voices out? Because I'm assuming some of those voices were people that you love and respect.
Ourselves sometimes,
right. How did you stay on path?
I think it was down to me how really, I think I had a lot more wobbles than he did. Because I guess I would be more naturally listening to other people. He has a very 0 Fs kind of approach. He doesn't care if people don't like him. He doesn't care if people think he's doing the right thing, as long as he feels he's doing the right thing and he knows his path. So he was steadfastly, consistently, doggedly determined. And because there was no wavering from him, there was no option, there was no B plan, I fell in with that.
I love how you give him credit. And when I say that, I mean that the content that you're creating and the women that you're talking to, you're really advocating for them to be strong and independent and not care about what other people think. But you strike this perfect balance with respecting your partner and respecting his contributions and fully acknowledging how his contributions led to your success in all aspects of life, on the financial side and everything else. So yeah. I think it's such a positive message that you're sending to women, saying, yes, be strong and independent, but also value the contribution of a partner, and don't ignore that or push that away, because you do it so eloquently, the way that you credit me for your collective success.
Yeah. I mean, the right partner really enhances your life. And I don't think either of us would have been as successful as we are without the other.
I agree.
And we never held each other back. You know, even when I said I'm moving to Australia without you, he was supportive. You know, it's incredible, really. You know, when he was doing his business, okay, we kind of like support whatever the other person wants to do, and invariably end up, you know, cheerleading for it. So yeah, I think, and that's a great thing about meeting someone slightly later as well. I think you have a stronger idea about where you're going, and you know if someone's going to champion and support and elevate that.
You have more experience. You know what, you know, you've had a certain amount of life experience when you find your partner later on. Like I found Valeria, it was later on. It wasn't later on
Not
for her.
yeah.
Not for her. It was later on for me.
Yeah.
So I already knew what I didn't want, and I had sufficient experience. I want to ask you something. I want to kind of go back to the topic of validation and the topic of validation for young women.
Yeah.
So, you know, you advocate for not trying to seek that validation externally, from friends, family, the internet, to only seek that within yourself. But are there, in your opinion, like, should you be completely closed off to other external validation, or is there some form of validation for young women in their early 20s, up until 30, that you think are healthy forms of validation?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, you know, for me, it's been a very conscious effort. Like me, how my husband is, he naturally seeks internal validation. So if he believes what he's doing is right, it is right, and doesn't care what other people think. That's an innate kind of instinct that he has. I don't have that. My instinct is to be a people pleaser, whether that's being a middle child or, you know, whatever else, the way I am. And even yesterday, so a therapist told me about this online tool by Positive Intelligence, and it's how you identify your inner saboteurs. So they talk about you have an inner sage who's very wise and knows the right path for you, and you have your inner saboteur, which is the critical voice, the internal voice. So, you know, we're, as bad critics of ourselves as anyone else is ever going to be. In fact, probably our biggest enemy is our own inner critic, right? So I did that, and I was like, I've done all this work. I've spent the last year talking to therapists, coaches. I know all this stuff. Still, my inner saboteur is the people pleaser.
Right.
So it's a conscious effort for me to kind of not put too much weight onto external validation. And
is there any external validation? Like, is there anything that's healthy? Like a therapist, is that healthy external? Like if a therapist says to you, yes, like I believe that you're going down the right path in life, like who should we listen to? If women aren't strong enough, generally speaking, if they're not strong enough or they don't feel that their own internal validation is sufficient to move them forward, are there any forms of healthy external validation that they can use?
Yeah, I think, I definitely believe in mentors and
that's a good one.
And not even just mentors in a business sense. I think obviously if there's something you want to do career-wise, take advice from someone who's done that thing already, not someone who's done something completely different or doesn't understand that thing you're trying to do. So if it comes from a valid source, like I want to do that thing and that person's successful at that thing, that's a pretty good source of validation of whether or not you're on the right path.
I love it, yeah.
And even in life, I've spoken to a lot of incredible women as part of the process of researching my book, over 30 experts in different fields. And one thing that struck me is the value of intergenerational friendships and the value of not just having friends that are exactly the same as you. So I think seeking diverse friendships and people who are a little bit further on in, friends, but they're further on in whatever part of life you want to be further on in. So if you've just had a baby, someone who's got older kids, someone who can really mentor you through that process is more useful than someone that's just in it together with you. You're all just flailing around and equally as unsure as each other. So I think we often seek validation from our closest friends, which is really reassuring, but often they're just reinforcing whatever anxieties we have. Someone who's already been there and done that and can give you some kind of distant, kind of like at a distance, informed advice might be more useful. But, there's that old thing of like, if someone wants to, talk to you about a topic, you kind of have to ask them, do you want to just vent or do you want my advice? Yeah. And I think a lot of us often like jump into advice when that person doesn't really need advice. They just want to.
Well, I think especially like kind of the type A personalities, they go into solutions mode right away.
Yeah.
When sometimes people just want to be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have another question for you. I feel that women in their 20s are almost like this victim of society, meaning they're kind of singled out as having this pressure put on them. physically. I mean, with the beauty standards as they are today, I think I've always thought it was insane, even back like in the 90s and, when I was younger in the 2000s. So there's that, there's, to your point and the thesis of your work, the premise of your work is this, pressure to get married by a certain age, where men, as I mentioned before, they don't have that pressure. The pressure to be a perfect mother. Did you notice that in society, and this is regardless of their age, but even if they're young mothers, I don't feel this pressure as a dad to be like, you have to be a good dad. You have to be a good dad. Other dads we're not getting together saying, oh my God, like I had this terrible dad moment. How did I do that? But women are doing it all the time. Women have this pressure to be a good mom. So you have to look a certain way. You have to have a career. You have to be this like perfect mother. And I'm talking about this. And as I'm saying it, I'm thinking of my wife because this is happening to her all the time. And women have this constant pressure starting in their 20s. They're given this 30-year-old deadline, again, which is the premise of your work. Why are young women, I feel like they're victimized by and shamed by all of society to do these certain things? Why are young women the target of all of this? Why? Can you explain this?
I could go on to a big rant about the patriarchy.
Please do. Because I genuinely want to know, because I see it like as a man, I don't experience it because I'm not a woman. I'm not a young woman, but I see it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think my generation, I'm nearly 40, geriatric millennial officially.
Is that what that's called?
Geriatric millennial, sexy, isn't it? So I grew up genuinely, I think my generation was the first that genuinely grew up believing in gender equality. My whole life, I believed and saw, for example, gender equality in the workplace. I saw women doing just as well as men, if not better, earning just as much money as men, if not more. Our relationship was, me and Michal were completely equal, very equal partners, up until a certain point. And the point is when you become a parent. And then the gender divide happens.
Tell me about that.
The gender gap. Like the gender pay gap. And I'm fascinated by the data on this.
It's the pay gap.
To start with the pay gap. So the gender pay gap doesn't happen until women become mothers. So women who are childless continue to earn at the same rate as men throughout their careers. Only when women have children does that gap open up.
These are stats.
That men,
I've never considered this.
start earning a huge amount more than women. That's because women still, despite some efforts on paternity leave and paternity pay and all that stuff, women still take the burden of childcare.
Yep.
They're more likely to step back from their careers, take a pay cut, go part time. Still now, and that happened to us as well. And we thought we were really enlightened and equal and all that, but at the time when we had a baby, it just made more sense for me how to step into the business and for me to step away. So the gender pay gap happened to us as well, and the division of domestic labour. As soon as you're the one taking maternity leave, you're the one who the standards, the kind of the habits get formed, and it's hard to unform them after that.
This is fascinating. I wish Valeria was here. This is really it really is because you're saying things that I haven't. Like, I don't know. I believe you. I see now. It's like I feel like you're enlightening me because I never thought about it, because like we employ almost exclusively females.
Yeah.
Right. And I never, when hiring a man or a woman, I can honestly say that I never cared if they were a man or a woman or whatever other cultural differences. I never cared. But there's a very real gap that occurs then when a woman has a child.
Yeah. And for me, I think, talking about the expectation gap, there is huge expectation gaps, as you started saying, but in terms of motherhood and parenthood, because we see these idealized versions of, what being a mother looks like. And for me, it was a huge shock. You think you're going to love it and have this instant, burst of joy and everything's going to be roses. And the reality is very different.
Yeah, I know.
So I think, I've spoken to quite a lot of motherhood mentors, and, initially when I started writing the book, my target was a little bit older. Now, women in my audience do have children, but by and large, they're child-free in their 20s. So I haven't focused as much on parenting, but the next book, 40 Phobia, will be all about that.
Is that the plan?
It could be.
Okay.
I think there's still mileage in 30 Phobia and turning 30 anxiety, though. I think, there's other things we can do with that as well.
Do you feel that we're doing enough as a society to, I guess, shorten, to eliminate this problem? Because I never really thought of it as a problem until you just pointed it out, that women do have all of these disadvantages, right after they have children. But is there something that, there's maternity leave, there's, I don't know, is there something that can be done? Or what should women do to kind of minimize the effect of this situation?
I think so I've met a lot of women entrepreneurs recently that are really focusing in on this space, this kind of maternal finance space.
Yeah.
And I think what's wild is there's such an incredibly big financial impact when you have a child, but very few people think that through. And very few people plan for the financial impact. So I think even in terms of your relationship and the impact on your relationship when you have a child, more people need to kind of set back before they have the baby or even before they start planning on having a child and think about how that's going to play out. Who's going to go back to work? How many days a week? How much are we going to make? What's going to be coming in? Really plan it out beforehand, because when you have that baby and the bomb goes off, you can't think straight. You can't plan, like it just happens and it unfolds as it unfolds. But very few women up till now have been planning for the financial and emotional fallout of having children. And more entrepreneurs are now working on that, the financial planning or even the relationship space. So when we have this thing in the UK called NCT, National Childbirth Trust, and you go for the classes for a couple months before you have kids. And, they tell you it's mostly about childbirth and labour, which, you can plan all you want, but it's coming out how it wants to come out, quite frankly. And I met a woman recently who was she was a divorce lawyer, and now she's a mediator, and now she runs classes in planning for having children. And I feel like that would have been a much more useful use of my time.
Like in terms of planning, in terms of the financial side and professionally?
All of it. So making sure you have those conversations with your partner and your family about how it's going to work financially, career-wise, who's going to do what, even roles and responsibilities, how this is going to affect your relationship and how you're going to mitigate for those impacts. Planning all of it up front is so much more useful than having a birth plan, which always goes out the window the second you're in the hospital.
Yes, I agree with you. I've been through three births of my own. Do you think that do you believe that men are supportive enough? And do you believe that men are doing as much as we can be doing to support women during this transitional time when they have kids?
I cannot speak for all men. I think that definitely more could be done. I think more men could be stepping up and being aware of the burdens and the mental load that their partners are taking on. There's a really big rise in male influencers that talk about the mental load and how you can support your partner. And I follow all of them and I really support that. And I think the more role models that men can see that look like that, the better.
I think. Well, I wholeheartedly agree that men should be as supportive as possible, and they should do everything. After all, this is their partner, and this is their child. But in men's defense, it's hard when you're not biologically wired, and I think that's where the gap is. When a man, he can be like, there's a certain kind of, I think, ceiling to the amount of empathy that we can we can have, because we just can't even fathom that connection between and I see it with Valeria. There's the connection that I have with our boys, but what she has with them is on a different level. It's not that it's more or less. It's just so intrinsically different. The biological connection is so much different than with a man.
Is it biological, or is it innate, or is it learned? I still don't know, because I feel like that. Of course, there are biological factors at play. Only a woman can grow and give birth to and breastfeed a baby. Not that everybody can, will, or should breastfeed. But beyond that point, beyond the first couple of months, I feel like there could be no difference. I feel like, definitely in our circumstances, my bond with my daughter is different than my husband's. But that is a factor of me putting more time into her.
But the fact that you're putting more time into it, that's a conscious decision that you're making as a mother. Valeria also puts more time with our children than I do. And I think, I truly believe that this is biological wiring. It is. Mothers are just, I believe they're more nurturers. And I believe that men, or at least the way it is for us, I have more tough love for my boys, because my priority is to prepare them for life as adults, and especially after I'm not around anymore. So everything I do, that's the foundational, that's the jump out, that's the foundation of my interactions with them, is preparing them for life. Whereas I feel with Valeria, and I won't say this for all women, but I'll say it from my experience. Valeria, and it's a good thing she's this way, that her foundation is more based on love, on love, and as it's manifested in spending more time, being more empathetic, being just nicer, being kinder. Not that I'm unkind to our boys, but for me, it's like, it's more tough love. It's more, and maybe if we had girls, it would be different. I don't know. I'll never know because we have 3 boys. So I just think it's innately different. We're getting into wild topics that I love.
We are getting into wild topics, and I'm not an expert in this. I feel in my core that it's not true. I think there is some biological limits, but I think they pretty much end when the baby comes out. And I think a man could have just as much of a nurturing role and be the default parent, be the primary caregiver. It's just in this society, we're hardwired to let men off that hook. And women become, I think, in my situation, I feel more of a default parent than a proactively. I would love to be a dad. I'd love to be the breadwinner, going out to work and come back and have the cuddles and do all the highlights as well.
That's not always. No, you're right, but that's not always the case. I mean, Valeria is very much. Valeria is in Los Angeles right now, working for a whole week, and she's away.
Yeah.
But here's another not fun, but is an interesting difference. If I'm away for a week on any kind, whatever, for business, let's say, I'll call Valeria. She calls at 7:45 because she knows I'm in the car driving them to school and she wants to participate in that time. She will call. It's like at 3:30 p.m. local time because she knows they're coming home. They're walking through that or whenever it is that they walk through, and she wants to do a FaceTime with them. When it's bedtime, they're in the bath. Okay, I want to see them in the bath. I want to see. And I said, do you think I'm just incompetent? Do you think I'm not, like, I'm okay here? Like, things are getting done. And I think that's one of the differences, is that as a mother, she's just like, she wants to make sure. And I'm just a lot more carefree. I'm just like, are you going to be okay when you get older? Like, are you, do your homework? Because if you don't do your homework, there'll be a negative effect of that. Like, you won't be as successful as I want you to be, and as you will likely want to be when you grow up. So there's a lot of nuances there.
Yeah, I think, that's true to an extent for us. My priority is that my daughter's happy, and Mia's priority is that she's successful. And hopefully she'll be both. But we'll see.
Hopefully she will be both. Hopefully she will be both. So what's next? What's next for you in terms of your career as an influencer? Is it okay to call you an influencer?
I don't see myself that way, and not for any other reasons. As I feel like the content creation has been almost like a byproduct of my
experience
book project.
Okay.
So I started when I started writing the book 30 Phobia, I thought I would just sit down for a couple of months and just blast it out. Mm-hmm. And then I started and then I was like, okay, I love, actually I need some real data here. I need some real insights. So I'm actually just going to, they do this thing in the entrepreneur world called Build in Public, if you've come across that, where you'll have these entrepreneurs now that are really open about all the ups and downs of their entrepreneur journey.
Okay.
And this great thing happened, this terrible thing happened, and they're just really open and they share everything. They build in public.
Amazing.
And I saw that and I loved that. And I was like, I'm going to do that, but for my book. So I just started sharing like musings and random insights and thoughts about, my journey is trying to become a writer, because again, I had no start point in the publishing world.
Yeah.
And I started sharing stuff, and I guess part of it was research. I started putting things out there and being like, what do you think? And gathering insight. So in the book, there's going to be things that people have told me on TikTok and Instagram and comments they've made, and by writing it in real time, they've really shaped the content of the book. And that's helped me see, for example, that 30 Phobia doesn't start at 29, it starts at flipping 19 or something.
Right.
So it's helped me define the audience. It's helped me define what they're interested in, what they're engaged with, what they're really worried about. And off the back of that, I did a really big quantitative research study. Like, I think it's the biggest study that's ever been done on this age group. 2,500 women in the UK and the US, aged 20 to 29. I asked them all about their hopes, dreams, fears, priorities. So I've got some really robust data.
What did you find? Can you give me the high level?
The high level. What was interesting is I came into it with a set of assumptions as a, millennial so my priorities and the priorities for my peers when we were turning 30 were more about financial success, buying houses, getting married, right? Today's generation of 20-something women also feel a huge amount of turning 30 pressure, but it's more about mental health, mental well-being, and financial security. They feel very financially insecure, and finding a life partnership, marriage is much less important.
So again, it's finding a partner,
but not necessarily getting married. Financial security is huge. I wasn't going to include anything about finance, but now it's a big theme in the book. And mental health, mental well-being was not really a consideration when I was in my 20s. Now it's obviously a huge focus, and a lot of women looking for kind of mental health hacks, and so a lot of that is going into the book. So the data has shown me that there are generational differences that are very real. There are some common threads like relationships, which will always be there. We're human. So that's helped me see, the priorities, and also just to show that this 30 phobia, this milestone anxiety, is a real thing. Like, and just some sad things, like 61% of women in their 20s feel like other people find life easier than them. And only 3 or 4% of women feel like they find life easier than other people. So everybody's going along in their 20s, completely overwhelmed and anxious and stressed out. And they feel like everyone else has it easy. And social media portraying life the way it does has a part to play in us feeling like it's easy for other people and it's hard for us. So you feel really alone. And my message is, you are not alone. If you are not married by the time you turn 30, if you're still living with your parents, if you're still earning 10,000 a year, you're actually in the majority, not in the minority.
Right.
What you're looking at on social media is a minority of very successful people or liars. And what you're looking at in reality, we never see reality. So I wanted the data to be reassuring, to show them that you're fine. You're not only do you not need to have done all these things, you're actually normal if you haven't. It's abnormal to be a millionaire by the time you turn 30. It's abnormal to have 4 kids by the time you turn 30. So it's just bringing them back to the reality, and that kind of like, it's okay. You are not in this on your own. We're all in it together.
I think you're doing great work. I think this is such a neglected topic, and I think it's the demand for wisdom on this and the data that you're harvesting. I think is really important. I think it's wonderful work. And then so there's going to be the book coming out.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're going to be doing some speaking tours.
Who knows? I mean, I don't have an agent or a publisher yet. So if anyone's out there listening and they are interested, I have got some live conversations going, but it's not officially been commissioned yet.
Are you self-published on this book?
I am not going to self-publish. So I want a traditional publisher.
Okay.
So that is the next thing to get this out there. And I mean, what's great about, the content side of things is I'm already done a couple of podcasts already this week about these topics. I'm already out there, spreading the wisdom, and it's not just my experience. I very much want to reflect the reality of how it is to genuinely be in your 20s right now. So I'm working with influencers who are at that age and in that niche, loads of experts, 30 or more women who are incredibly successful in their fields and have shared all their wisdom. And I've got all this data. So it's not just my subjective experience, which I think a lot of content in this space is very subjective.
Yes.
I want to be quite objective.
Are you planning on creating a podcast?
It always goes through my mind. I think down the line, I think the content really lends itself very well, because the chapters in my book are very self-contained topics. So it's like, okay, so you're turning 30 and you're not married. You're turning 30 and you don't have a baby. You're turning 30 and you haven't got any money. You're turning 30. So it's like everything is a self-contained topic that could be a conversation in itself.
Well, I think that even, if I was advising you, because I happen to dabble in social media, but just a bit. If I was to advise you, I would say that off the top of my head, I could see a show where you're talking with just known young women who are in their 20s, who are in that age range, let's say from 25 to 29 or whatever your criteria would be, to do that and reach out to these influencers, people who have a following or some kind of reach, and bring them in for interviews, bring them in and interview them. But in addition to those women, I would also try to find I don't want to say regular women, just women who are not influencers. And the reason for that is because, to your point, influencers they could be in that 1% group that it's either not true or they happen to have made it or whatever it may be. So they're not exactly like necessarily the correct people, not the correct, but they're not reflective of society at large. So I would do this mix between these people who are known, who they have the kind of they have the trust and the ear of people, but also kind of just normal people, like regular everyday people who are going through this and having this conversation. Because to hear your not assessment, but you're just very reassuring. Like, I'm not a woman and I'm not in my 20s, but I wish I would have known you in my 20s. I mean, you would have been a child, but I mean, someone like you who would advise me, because I remember my 20s, like even as a man, like it's a difficult time.
Yeah.
And I feel it's universal. Most people I speak with in their 20s are having a tough time figuring out what the hell's going on with their life.
Yeah. Is that, and I think the universal feeling in your 20s is uncertainty.
Yes.
And for a lot of people, uncertainty breeds anxiety and fear. And that is the problem that I'm trying to solve, because actually now I'm later in life and looking back, uncertainty, if you can reframe uncertainty as opportunity, you're away, because now when you have that uncertain feeling, it's really just like an open playing field. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. And that's so exciting. I would hate if my life was all written out now. I am excited that I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if and when this book's getting published. I don't know if I'm doing a podcast, a stage show. I can see this being a movie in the manner of He's Just Not That Into You, which also started off as a self-help book. I can see it all and all the opportunities, and I'm letting it happen, and I'm just being really open. And that for me, I'm not anxious. I'm not anxious about turning 40. I'm excited because I feel like the best is yet to come. So, and I agree with you. I'll be asking for your tips and when we do the podcast.
Anytime. But
I've been approached about it a few times, a few different people, and I'm just, my agenda is full, and it's just like I need to prioritize actually getting this book down on paper. But I think it's something that I'll do after, like when
I think, sorry to interrupt you, I apologize. I think the podcast is a lot easier than you think. Like, I also thought it was this whole complex thing. It can be as hard. Like, okay, so for Valeria, it's hard. For Valeria, it's like there's so much involved and there's so many people involved. Mine is a lot simpler. Like, I have this, I have a producers who I work with. I have like one of our internal staff kind of moonlights for me, helping me with scheduling. It's a lot simpler than you think. Like, structurally, it's a lot simpler. It'll take way less time than you think it'll take.
Yeah.
If you do one interview a week, like if you air one interview a week, like I'm filming with you today, and then I have 3 next week, but then I'm off for a month because my one a week is, and there's a lot of content that can be gathered from like a conversation like this that can be deployed to short form, to your reels on Instagram and to TikTok, which will exponentially grow your audience. And
I love interviewing people. Like, it would be more comfortable for me to be sitting there than here today, because my background is market research. I interviewed people for a living.
Yeah.
And for the book, the first place I started was who are the people that know about all these things? Who are the therapists, coaches that are really, well known in the space? And I'm just going to interview them. So I've got hours of interviews, but it's more behind the scenes.
Well, I think you'll do really well as an interviewer. I mean, you interview very well.
Oh,
I didn't know what to expect, because you and I have only spent time socially, right? So I didn't know.
And this is a new thing for me. Being interviewed is very alien to me. Interviewing someone, love it.
Well, it's, you know what, for me, all of it was alien, but it's like anything else. If you're uncomfortable, what I do is I use it as a signal. If I'm uncomfortable doing something, I force myself to do it.
Yeah.
It's growth. It's growth. I do that with cold plunging.
Yeah. Oh,
you guys are coming over for that, by the way. Didn't we make plans? Yeah, we did.
I'm not sure. I think I'm trying to wriggle out of it.
But you don't have to. How about we do this? I think Mihal's going to do it. I think he's
already into it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make you a deal. I'm not going to pressure you into doing it. So when you guys come over and the 4 of us get together to do this, I'm not going to like make you feel like you have to do it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Because I no longer respond to external pressure anyway.
There you go. Perfect. Kate, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you here. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great chat.
Thank you.